Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know the Lunar New Year celebration is happening right now, or I don't know if it's right now, but shortly. Happy birthday, Hope. Well, today isn't Lunar New Year. Lunar New Year is actually on Saturday, but so your birthday is not the same day as Lunar New Year, but that's great. Thank you for being here on your birthday. I don't know why this is showing. Okay, I have 6 o'clock, so we'll get started here. Um, why is this not working? Oh, everyone see the PowerPoint? Great. Thank you. So welcome everyone. We are in week 4. We are halfway through the mini semester, a quarter of the way through the entire semester. This course is only 8 weeks though. So and we're going to be talking about art and identity in Korea under Japanese colonialism. Big topic today. So first off, the midterm exam. So it is available to download as a Word document on Canvas now. It is due Friday at 11:59 p.m. So let me show you this. But okay, there we go. How to do this. So basically, so do you see Canvas right now? Okay. So you're gonna go to modules like normal. You're gonna load. Here we go. Oh, here. Let me collapse all this. Go down to week 4. Then there's midterm. Click on this. Should open up, and then it's a document like this. Here, the images that appear in the document, I have the files here for you if you would rather look at them that way. So when you get the document, it will look like this. It makes sure it says Spring 2024 Session 1. I don't know why it would not, but if you have an older version of the exam, that's not correct. So it's worth 60 points. And please read and follow the directions. The main thing I want to emphasize is that the question prompts have multiple parts, and I've tried to divide up the question so that you can see each of the parts. So make sure you're answering all the parts of the question. The other thing is you need to, for every single one, you need to cite at least one text or video from class in your answer as that textual evidence. Some of the questions you'll see they're not visual analyses, but you still can paraphrase something that you heard or read, and just put that parentheses, author last name, comma page number. Or for this, just for the videos, put parentheses speaker's last name, comma title of the video. You don't need to put the minute number. It's okay. Remember, all of this, so because of that, all of this is open book. You need to go back into the class course materials to do this test. Please do so. It will help you immensely. Okay, so just to go over the questions. So the first question is just your opinion. It's just how or what you think or about North Korea, basically. So make sure, think about what is something that we talked about in week 2 or read or watched in week 2 that you could potentially paraphrase or quote in this question to get that point. And so I'm not going to read them all, but then you have visual analysis here. And make sure that you answer the interpretation question. Notice that for the description, it's 4 points just for describing the artwork. So some of us on our visual analyses, we're kind of skipping that part a little bit and just going right into the interpretation. But remember, there's 2 parts to visual analysis. So you need to have that, this part. Yes, discuss the Minjung goals, discuss the Minjung movement. This one's a little bit different because you just need to give examples of artworks that, match the prompt. And you don't need to do a visual analysis, but you do need to just explain briefly why you think it relates to, particularly in this case, the Minjung goal. So you're not doing like an extended visual analysis, but just, like a 1 sentence. This relates because. A comparative visual analysis. This one is probably going to be the hardest one or take you the most time to do between North and South Korean art. Make sure you answer this question. It's very open-ended. How do these artworks relate to politics of their respective societies? So, you can take that in a couple of different directions with either of these artworks. And then, is this the last question? No. And then another single artwork visual analysis. Notice there's 2 questions for this interpretation, so make sure you answer both of them. And it's what we're talking about today. And then the last question is just a reflection, which is really open-ended. What's an artwork that really stood out to you and why? So for this one, your citation should be just something that relates to the artwork. So it's probably going to be one of the readings rather than videos, because the videos don't, I think maybe this week's lecture video had to do with the artwork particularly, but the other ones and last week's, yeah. So, okay. So that's the test. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about the midterm? Oh, sorry. I thought I got rid of that. Okay. There are no suggested word counts, but think along the lines of probably you need 200 words for each of them, which is kind of a lot. Maybe less for like the opinion questions. I'm not going to be grading on word count. I'm only going to be grading on content. So, make sure you've answered the question and that it works. Sorry, just so Gus's question is it 1 citation per entire question? It's just 1 citation per prompt. So per like number 4, you just need 1 citation in number 4. Excuse me. For the ones that have multiple parts, it's still just 1 citation. I'm sorry about the directions. I thought I deleted that off of it. All right. Any other questions? If you have questions, obviously, you can obviously just email me and I'll let you know the answer. Okay, let's move over to today. Okay, so attendance question. We're gonna start right off with it. What do you think of when you hear the words imperialism and colonialism? What are some things that you think of? There's no right or wrong answer. Um, Based on your experience, it could be specific, it could be general, lots of different things. Okay. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I was gonna say all of us are putting countries down. I'm like, okay, what else besides just particular countries? Yes, here we go. Some ideas, some like actions that might be taken or done. Good. So let's start off here. So yes, we have a couple of us saying, excuse me. Sorry, I still have a cough from being sick last week, so I'm probably going to be doing that quite a bit. So I'm apologizing for that up front. So yes, some imperial powers we have listed: the US, France, the UK, Japan, and China. Yeah. Um, then yeah, those seem to be the main ones here too. I don't think it was I mean Spain was the major empire before France, well before Great Britain, before the British Empire and before France, also the Portuguese and the Dutch. They were they were empires kind of, not in the same way that we tend to think of in the 21st century, but there have been lots of empires. Let's see. So yes, Maddie, thank you. Smaller communities being mandated by larger empires. Yes, very important here. So there's this relationship between a large power and maybe what is perceived to be a smaller power. Yeah, or a smaller group of people or culture or something like that. And Cameron says subjugation. Yes, exactly. So a powerful entity subjugates a less powerful entity. Um, so yes, oppression, same thing, kind of along the lines with subjugation. This is from Daphne. So cultures also get destroyed. Yes. Oftentimes, especially in the 21st century, when we think back about the age of imperialism, age of colonialism, which was kind of like 18th century through the 20th, really until World War II. Um, Although we think of all these cultures being destroyed, right? So the kind of oppressing power destroys the culture of the oppressed people, right? Yes, Claire, Western Europe, yeah, especially the British Empire and the French Empire dividing up the world, right? They just go into these places and they start putting borders around things, and that's what sticks, right? So Hunter says foreign country influence on another. So influence, it's a little bit more than influence. So influence is kind of very vague. That can be very amicable sometimes, but and sometimes you can find some senses of mutuality in an imperial colonial relationship. But we might want to be a little bit more specific than just like influence, right? Good. So Cade brings up expansion. Absolutely. A nation or group expands outwards. Very important here. So this idea of continually expanding, you are a country or an empire, quote unquote. That means you want to keep bringing in new areas, new people, new land, particularly. And Kyle brings up resources. Absolutely. So if you're the empire, you're the center, and then your colonies are your periphery, and you're trying to bring in resources from those colonies to the center. Exactly. Ian says forceful takeover. Yes, sometimes imperialism and colonialism are forceful. We're actually going to learn today a little bit about the nuance of the Japanese colonization of Korea, which is kind of forceful, but not necessarily in the same way you might be thinking. Let's see. Yeah, so Fatima brings up reforming itself. So you kind of have to sorry. I don't know whether there's established culture there or not. Yeah, you have to reform a culture to something else, right? So there's already this established culture in an area, and now it has to be reformed to match the imperial power, right? Good. Let me see if we have any other ideas here. So military power, yes. So military is very helpful to imperial powers or empires when they're trying to expand, right? They sometimes will use the military to do so, right? Yes, a negative, Elsa, this is good to bring up. So it has a very negative connotation. So if nowadays in the 21st century, we see what's happened because of imperialism and colonialism, and we know that a lot of negative results happened from it, right? So we have a very negative, or we tend to have a negative take on it. But during the time, different people had different ideas about it. And not everyone saw it as negative. And today, not everyone sees it as negative. But we will be focusing mostly on things that are really negative, because that's unfortunately Korea's history, is the negative results of it. Let's see. Yes, so imposing European or Western ideals or capitalism upon other people. Yes, absolutely. From Ryan says that. Yeah. Okay, good. So I think of a couple of different things, and all of them align basically with what we have here. So I definitely think of this idea of expansion. So the United States, the manifest destiny. I remember learning this as something. I don't think it was ever given to me. So this is this idea in the 19th century that it's the US, the United States' destiny, right, to expand the North American continent. I don't personally remember learning this as like a positive or like as a good thing necessarily when I learned it in like middle school. But people definitely hold on to it in the US as something that is wonderful, right? But obviously in the 21st century, and really throughout the 20th century, indigenous people of North America have constantly discussed and brought forth how this was not a good thing for them, of course, right? So we can see that kind of relationship even in the US history. So the next photo I'm going to show is graphic, a little bit graphic. There's no blood or anything or gore or anything, but it shows a European man holding the arm of an enslaved African colonized subject of the Congo, and they have removed the enslaved African person's hand, so they do not have a limb. So I'm going to show that in 3, 2, 1. So here I also think of that harm, right? Not just brought on from the eraser of culture, but also physical harm can be done to people and the land. Both can suffer under these um, imperial and colonial systems, right? And so this is from the Congo. If you've heard of the Belgian colonization of the Congo, they really wreaked horrible, atrocities upon native Congan people. And the last thing I think about is my own field, right? So if you've ever been to a museum like this is oh, I don't even remember I think this is the British Museum. Yeah, this is the British Museum. If you've ever been to a museum, how do they get all their stuff? Not every museum got all their stuff like this, but the British Museum, the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a lot of the objects that they got, or the vast majority of them, come through systems that are imperial or colonial in nature, right? And so, as Ryan says, a lot of people, and in my personal opinion, I tend to think this way as well, a lot of people call it theft now. Even though I'm an art historian and I love having art in museums, I love having cultural properties in museums, but we in the 21st century have to start reconcile with the fact that we need to reflect on the meaning of these objects as they exist in these institutions. So, however, though, there is a difference between imperialism and colonialism. So they are related, but slightly different, and their exact definitions are always being debated. So imperialism and empire go together, which seems like we kind of understand that. But just because a country does not call itself an empire does not mean that they don't act like one, right? Imperialism typically refers to the ideology, particularly of expansion via colonizing. So we'll get to that. An empire typically maintains some form of centralized control over all the areas that it absorbs to procure its interests in those areas. So, for example, resources, where it's natural resources or human resources. An empire can be continental or overseas. And in practice, empires assert not only political dominance, but also cultural and economic dominance over those areas, right? So it's not just, oh, we're in charge of you now, but there's this aspect of the culture of the people who are being colonized is supposed to change, like we said, reform to match that of the imperial power. Economically, they start to depend on the imperial power for different things. So colonialism is the means to an end for this ideology. It's the way through which empires dominate over those areas and people by taking them on as a colony. So whether that's the word that they use to label them or not. So typically this means eliminating, excuse me, the people's sovereignty and autonomy over the land. So this sets up the dichotomy that is always in question when studying imperialism, colonialism, colonizer versus colonized. And what's important in learning about imperialism and colonialism is to ask, which is the question we're going to ask today, what issues do colonized people face? What are their experiences, and how does their history as a colonized group affect their present conditions? So Kyle asks, was religion used for imperialism or colonialism? Absolutely, it can be, and it has been. In the US particularly, there are sects of people who believed that the expansion across North America was a God-given, quote unquote, Christian right. And we'll find out a little bit about Japan when we talk about later. I'll talk about their kind of ideology. Oh, well, so don't think so. They're two different things. So imperialism and colonialism are two different things. But remember, so think of imperialism as the ideology. So that's kind of the thought behind it. And colonialism is like the actual activity of it or the dominating itself. So religion can definitely be imperative to either, right? So you can use religion to dominate, or you can have religion as some of the basis of your ideology for expansion, right? So good question. I understand why yeah, that's kind of difficult to see here. Yeah, but does that make more sense, Kyle? So it's kind of like it can be, they are very related, they're very interconnected, but a little bit different. And so religion is part of both of them. Good. So let's talk about the Japanese colonization of Korea. So Japan colonizing Korea was not a random event, actually. Japan did not just attack Korea and take over. That sometimes I see that in a lot of popular culture. People talk about it that way, but that's not what happened. So it has a longer history that actually began in the late 19th century. So Japan was the first foreign country with which Korea created a modern international treaty to open its ports. So this was in 1876 with the Konghwa Treaty. So before this, Korea did not allow international trade except for with China. However, Japan competed with China for trade and political influence in Korea after the start of this treaty. And so this led to the first Sino-Japanese War in 1895. And Japan won and pushed China actually all the way out of Korea. So Japan did this again with Russia in 1905 and installed Korea as a protectorate after beating them. So a protectorate means that Korea was no longer to have its own military. And then the culmination of these events together is what led to Japan's official colonization of Korea in 1910. So the court's finances and power had been in ruin from the previous international policies, so there wasn't much else that they could do. And the Korean emperor at the time, his name was Emperor Gojong. One of his officials is actually the one who signed over political control of the peninsula to the Empire of Japan. So you can see here, it's a little bit more complicated than like Japan beat Korea. It was actually officially given over to Japan as a colony by someone in the Joseon court. So this is actually a photograph of Emperor Gojong. He's the second to last technical emperor or king of Korea. This is in 1897. He actually established Korea as quote unquote the Great Han Empire this year in order to try and like show that Korea had some sense of imperial endeavor or wanting to become modern, quote unquote, and compete with the likes of Japan, the United States, the British Empire. Of course, that didn't, as we know, work out. So what do you notice, though, about Emperor Koljong in this picture in 1890 from 1897? Anything interesting strike you about it? Yes, exactly. He's wearing not a traditional robe that you might see someone who is of a very high status in Joseon wear. He's wearing a Western style military uniform. Yeah. And ooh, Ryan, very good for pulling this up. His hair is short, I think. I think his hair is actually short. Um, in this photo. I can't say that for certain, but he at least wanted his hair to look short in this photo, right? Which is important, right? So traditionally, or in Chosun, men were also supposed to have long hair and they would tie it up in a bun and they would wear a hat over it. But here that's not how his hair appears, right? His hair appears like it's short in a quote unquote Western style. Yes, exactly. So you can see. Yes, very good, Elsa. So there's also this kind of sword here, right? I can't really tell what it looks like, but it's probably a kind of Western style sword, I would imagine. Um, I know this what is this called? The hilt. I mean, I'm not an expert in swords, but I have seen quite a few Korean swords, and I don't think they have this kind of like what is that, handle kind of thing on it. So yeah, exactly. So you can see, even though all of this is going on with Japan and European powers in Korea at the time, the court was really trying to modernize, which came in the lot mostly in the form of westernizing, right? Yeah, like a rapier maybe is what it is. Yeah, exactly. Very good. So, of course, this brought forth the Japanese colonial period, right? So this period is very complicated. So, and it's not just kind of like one story or one note. So there are essentially three periods actually within just this 35 years. So the 1910s are typically called the military rule era, which is defined by the Japanese colonial government using military police to assert dominance over the Korean people. But as you can imagine, that only ignited Korean people's fervor for self-rule. So this led to the March 1st, 1919, the first major demonstration in 20th century Korean history. So I mentioned this last week. It was inspirational to the Minjung movement, right? So the success of this movement for independence, it's called the 3-1 movement in Korean, or Samil Undong. It actually led to the era of cultural rule, which is during the 1920s. And so during this time, this is when industrial expansion and technological development exploded in Korea through Japanese colonial policies. So rather than using like military force or like policing to try and subjugate Korean people, they tried to do it through these different kinds of means that are more about like developing the economy and culture. So for our class, this is when the Japanese colonial government developed arts programs and education to modernize Korea and Korean people. So hence they call it cultural rule. Yeah, so Ryan says the word soft power tactics. Yeah, we would call that soft power. We usually call that like late 20th century, we start talking about soft power. But absolutely, it's a lot like this soft power tactics. So not using force, but using these kind of quote unquote nicer things. So what's going on in this photograph here? What do you notice? This middle photograph that I just pulled up with cultural rule. If you can kind of tell, it was hard for me to get this photograph to look very clear, but I've seen it in a lot of people. Yeah, exactly, Cade. Yeah. Um, sorry, let me put this on. It's so yeah, there's a couple of different things you can notice here. They're clearly in a gallery, right? They're observing some kinds of paintings, and then Cameron has brought up that they look like Western style paintings. Yeah, see how they're framed? That you do not traditionally do that in East Asian style, in East Asian painting format. That's not really something that you see as these kind of frames. Um, and yeah, these are all, number one, these are all girls, right? And they all have long hair, they have a braid, and they're kind of wearing this. This was actually the school uniform for women, for girls at the time. It was a kind of traditional style where they had a shirt tucked into a long skirt. Um, but it doesn't look the same as it would have in Joseon. Um, yeah. This is actually at the Joseon Art Exhibition, which was the official Japanese colonial exhibition of fine art. And they had an oil painting section, they had an ink painting section, they had calligraphy section, and they had a sculpture section. So we'll talk a little bit more about modern art in a bit, but you can see these are the kinds of things that Japan started implementing in Korea. Why would you want to show, especially, excuse me, why would it be important for schoolgirls to go see the art show like this, particularly like a Western art show, if it's kind of Westernized art? What do you think? And what does that kind of demonstrate? Yeah, to educate them, right? To kind of, what kind of education though? Yeah, feel involved. Okay, yes, indoctrination, some kind of indoctrination, maybe. Yes, here we go. Where did it see? Cameron says aesthetic education. Yes, exactly. They're trying to, excuse me. They're trying to build up these young school children's sense of aesthetic to some particular like level, right? That's something we call aesthetic education. And that's a part of what Ian says here, modernizing, right? There's this particular level of aesthetic that people are assumed to need to achieve, and that's part of the modernizing project, right? Exactly. So yeah, it goes along with all these ideas. It is indoctrination. It is a lot like immersing them in the imperial ideology, right? But it is through art, right? And so we kind of think of it a little bit less like evil, but it does have all of those kinds of all of these imperial ideological backgrounds to it, right? Good. So, unfortunately, the 1930s saw the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Pacific War. So this is the time that truly lives in infamy in Korean history because for the Empire of Japan, this was the war mobilization period. Therefore, Japan tried to extract as many resources, both natural and human, from the Korean Peninsula as it could in its effort to expand and take over all of Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. So the ideology that Japan used to get Japanese people on board was centered around the cult of the emperor and Japanese supremacism. So that's the religious aspect to this. So they believe the emperor is like the supreme leader, and they're trying to unify around his quote unquote project of expanding, right? But in Korea, they preached an ideology of unity between Japan and Korea under Japanese culture. So this is, in English, it's called Japan and Korea as one body. So Neson Ilche, or Nansen Itai is what it is in Japanese. So, as the Japanese military expanded, the sexual slavery apparatus of the Japanese military also expanded, and many Korean women were coerced into it. Those are called the comfort women. So, this is something that you'll see a lot in contemporary Korea, is the issue of the comfort women. They're these women who survived sexual slavery for the Japanese military during World War II. So eventually, Korean men were also drafted into the Japanese military to survive, or excuse me, to serve, particularly on the front lines as human fodder. So when people talk about the Japanese colonial period as a horrible and evil time in Korean history, while the earlier periods were not great, this period is the one in which they are referring. So this is when people talk about how Japan tried to erase Korean culture and tried to, this is when the fact that Korean people couldn't speak Korean in certain spaces. Korean people had to change their names. They had to get official Japanese names. This all happened actually quite late into the colonial period. It was during the war effort time. Yeah, so Tyler says, yeah, the word comfort women is it's very disgusting, right? It is a pretty disgusting word. Fortunately, that's what people call it a lot of the time in Korean, which is 위안부. Also, 정신대 you'll hear, which is like the official name for the sexual slavery apparatus. Unfortunately, in English, we don't really have, I mean, we can call them enslaved women, who particularly were used for sexual, military sexual industry, the sexual industry. Yeah, there's not a lot of there's really no great terms that are very respectful to use, unfortunately, to discuss that issue. So, what stands out to you about Seoul in the 1930s? Let's look at this photo now. I'm showing you a lot of photos because I really want you to understand what changes that are happening here. This is a major time of change. Um, so this is a postcard actually. And this here on the corner over here, this building on the left, this is the Hwashin department store, which is one of the first department stores in Korea. So what do you notice about this? This is actually Chongno, which is a place you can still go. I just go there all the time, actually, in Korea. So what do we got here? Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, so the street lamps. Yes, exactly. The street lamps, they look very American or kind of European style, very much so. Yeah. And English. Yes, there's a tobacco sign in English, right? Students always notice that. What other languages or texts can you see in this photo? Hopefully it's big enough you can kind of tell. Because there's a lot of them. People notice these. Let's see here. Yeah, so yes, of course. On top, this is a Japanese postcard. Very good, Elsa. This is a Japanese postcard. They would use these postcards. Korea as a colony became a hot tourist spot for Japanese people to kind of see, the power of Japan at the time and what they were doing in the colonies. So they have these postcards. They're very interesting. I'm actually studying them a little bit. Um, let's see. Chinese characters. Yes, exactly. So do you see? So Chinese characters were actually the commonplace text really until the late 19th century in Korea. And you still see a lot of Chinese characters. You won't see them today, but even in the early 20th century, you see a lot of Chinese characters. Yes, so there's a streetcar right here in the middle. Yeah, exactly. This is a tram, a trolley, that they would use this is like the public transport system. The architecture is very westernized, right? It's like, definitely doesn't look like a kind of Korean style home. Um, they're kind of like very basic, the blocky, is it Greco-Roman revival style? I'm not very familiar with Western architecture kind of movements and stuff. I have a hard time with I mix them all up, so maybe someone can help. But yeah, Western style. People are in suits. Some are in quote unquote Western style suits. You can see this man here. And this man over here, he's also in that. And then other people are still in Korean outfits, right? So this is like what would just be called Joseonbok or Hanbok. Um, at this time, it's just be called Weebok. But yeah, so you see that. Bicycles. Yes, there's bicycles. This man is riding a bicycle. So yeah, see, there's a lot of mixing, right? There's a lot of mixtures of native local kind of cultural elements that are continuing into the 20th century, and then these kind of what are newer, at least to Korea, um, Japanese Western style developments as well. So that brings us to modern art. So art was also one of these aspects that got modernized during the Japanese colonial period. So one of the major shifts is, of course, in the media available for artists to use. Another major shift is the expansion in styles in which artists work, right? So local East Asian art forms continue to be practiced and created. So what do you think this is? What is this medium here? This is, unfortunately, I couldn't fit the captions on here, but this is actually from 1911. And this is actually an image of Emperor Goljong, but back in the right, the Chosun style emperor's garb, right? Ink. Yes, it's an ink on, I think it's ink on silk. Yes, and it has, Callie has noticed the five peaks. Yeah, the sun, moon, and five peaks motif, which is something that would be displayed behind the king or the emperor to demonstrate his power or symbolize his power, right? Um, let's see, paint, ink on paper. Yeah, exactly. So we have the continuation of this kind of art. We also have foreign media, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about. And foreign styles come into Korea for the first time. So particularly from Europe and North America, primarily what we call Western style art. I tend to say more European because that's where it originates, really. Not really in America or in the United States. So what medium is this? Or what style is this as well? And we're going to talk about this. Yeah. Hope, thank you. Yes, Impressionism is our kind of a I'd say branch, a global branch of Impressionism. We're gonna clarify that. But yes, Impressionist style and oil painting. Yes, oil painting on canvas. Exactly. Yeah, so oil paint and canvas, like the idea of a stretched canvas, that was not in Korea until like the late 19th century. So, and then finally, we have artworks, art that's taking from both of these artistic cultures. So we call this hybrid forms of art. You can call them mixed forms of art. So can you tell what's hybrid about this artwork? I might need to show, I might need to show a closer view of it. Can anyone tell? So it is ink on silk still. It is an ink painting still. So thinking about the vertical view a little bit, it does have to do a little bit with it. Let me see if I can zoom in on this. Yeah, can I zoom in? Am I zoomed in? Can you tell? Yes, okay. Can you kind of tell what's been done here a little bit? Created particularly around here. Shading, yes. So okay, good. So there's shading. Yes, there is a sense of shading on the rooftops, right? That's a little bit different. In the blending, yeah. Exactly, yeah. The coloring overall is definitely a little bit more quote unquote Western style looking. So a lot of people say, and the more I look at it, the more I'm kind of like, I'm not sure. This artist, his name is An Jung-sik. He's like the premier ink painter of Korea during the early 20th century. He's trying to like employ a kind of linear perspective here. So it's very unusual to see this kind of perspective in Chosun art and East Asian painting, where you're kind of looking, if we zoom back out, from a single point in front, and then you kind of get a view far back. That's very strange. Usually you'll get more of a kind of aerial type view, or you get what's called a overview as well, which is kind of a mixture of aerial views and front views and side views, which is called the overall view or 정경 overall view. So can you kind of see that a little bit in this perspective in this painting is quite kind of inspired by Western style perspective, Western perspective. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's much less blotchy and wispy. Um, as Hope says, yes. It's definitely a lot more clear, saturated. Who said saturated? I think Fatima said very saturated colors for sure. Yeah, like the mid-ground up is a little bit more kind of quote unquote traditional perspective of the mountain. And then yeah. So, be disjointed. Yes, exactly. Usually there's a couple of different, they usually traditionally say in this kind of landscape painting, there's like a lot of different perspectives shown at once. There's actually three views or the three perspectives or something like that. Um, but yeah, good. So, negative effects of colonialism. So, despite this, which we kind of think of as maybe this is a good thing, right? This is kind of a positive. There's this of this flourishing. I mean, honestly, art flourished during the early 20th century, which is kind of sad, a little bit weird to say, but it's true. Um, so while those developments may seem great, there's a lot of problems for Korean people derived from their experiences as colonized people. So a major one is the loss of identity due to cultural assimilation and economic hardship. And this continued to affect Korean societies even after liberation, right? So from industrialization, many Korean people were displaced from their homes and ended up impoverished as well. So Japan instituted systems that exploited both the natural and human resources of Korea, and this meant that after Korea was liberated, there was this lack of sustainable infrastructure that was geared towards Korean people's needs. Everything had been geared towards exporting it to Japan for the imperial endeavors. So thus, the question of Koreanness or being Korean, right, is what becomes the central issue in Korean society post-colonialism. So we've looked at that, right, these past few weeks and we're going to continue to look at it a little bit, or a lot today. So this, I should have explained this earlier. So this image is it's a propaganda image of Korea and Japan as one body is what this is. So this one says Japan on it, actually says inside. Japan called themselves the inside. And this says Sun for Joseon. And they're holding hands and kind of walking over a hill together. Does anyone recognize what this sculpture is? This is a contemporary sculpture. Has anyone seen these before? Especially if you do Korean studies. What is it? Does anyone know? Yes, this is the this is the memorial to the Day, the Comfort Women. Yeah, and these are all over. They're in South Korea. There are some that are in Japan, actually. They're in Europe. They're in North America. We have a couple. Um, some people call it Sonyasang, which means the girl statue. Some people call it Pyeonghwasang, which is statue for peace. The artists originally call it statue for peace. Um, and many people, yes, exactly, Ryan. So Japan still is very iffy on whether they officially admit that sexual slavery was a system of the military during the Pacific War, but obviously, everyone besides Japan knows that it was very much used during the war. And so it's a major issue of conflict between the Japanese government mostly and the Korean government in trying to have a global history of relationships between Korea and Japan. So this is a major issue that you'll see brought up constantly when talking about the Japanese colonial period. Okay, so this question of what is Korean or Koreanness, and even the question of comfort women, right, too, so is the question of identity. So what is identity? What do you think? What are some ways, how would you define that to someone? How would you, if I said, what do you think identity is? What are some things you would say about it? Okay, Callie says how you would label yourself. So it's like a label that you put on you, right? So Tyler is bringing up kinds of identities here. So yes, so there are different kinds of identities. So your culture is one of them. Your experience can shape how you identify. Your opinions also. Yes, and Claire agrees with that. Good, Maddie. Yeah, your personal value. So it's something that's very personal to someone. Fatima says how you grew up. So kind of just situational, right? Like you didn't necessarily choose it. It's just what you kind of were born into, right? And it's how you ended up, right? So the food you eat, your religion, your experiences from that. Maricela says your heritage, right? Exactly. So something about what you have inherited from the past, right? Um, Good. And Kate, very vaguely, just traits that you would attribute to yourself, right? So different things that you might say about yourself. Exactly. Different associations, says Gus. Yeah, things you might associate with yourself. Ryan, categories. Yes, exactly. So just different categories that maybe you fit yourself into, or maybe that you fit yourself onto yourself. Hope makes you who you are. Yeah, exactly. And Hunter, nationality, ethnic background. Yeah, those are like the big ones that we'll be talking about. But those aren't the only ones, right? Yeah, exactly. Good. Oh, Jimin direct messaged me this, but Jimin says it's like a filter that the experiences pass through to reach you, right? So the way that we respond to things and we think about things, the way we react to them, can kind of be filtered through our experiences, which make up our identity, right? Exactly. So there's lots of different identities that we can have, and they're all basically, following along these lines. So kinship and friendship, we identify with others, right? So our identities that we have with other people, which could be family or just simply friendly. In a way, your enemies are part of your identity as well, right? Ethnic and racial. So that kind of sense of, you know, maybe biological inheritance of traits that you have. The way you look might be a certain way that's related to because you are of a certain race, right? Or maybe certain cultural traits that you also identify with your race or ethnicity. So there's also geographical or national. So this is a little bit different from ethnic or racial. So this is geared more towards think about the geography particularly. So you're within a certain country. And so because you just happen to be within these confines, this geographical location, you have certain things about you that you feel match, right? Your interests or your occupation. So what you like and what you do define who you are. And in a lot of cultures, what you do is actually the primary identity people think about. You're religious or spiritual. So what you believe beyond just just what we see or what we feel or what everyone experiences, right? um Gendered and sexual, so how you express your body in and how you are sexually or romantically attracted to others or not, is very important, and how you express yourself in regards to that. And I think all of this can kind of be boiled down to this kind of idea of culture. Identity and culture are very close to each other. They're almost like two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways, right? But the big question I want to ask is, am I or are we only ever just one of these identities? Are we just ever our ethnic identity only, or our religious identity only, or gender only, right? At one given time. Right, exactly. I like this. Let's see, Claire says, I think they influence and act together. Exactly. So we have all of these identities at once. And so these identities all act together to influence and inspire whatever's going on in our lives and how we accept things, right? Yes, I have to do a rainbow, this is the Roy G. Biv rainbow for identity, right? So what kind of identities did you want to express? So for your blog this week, everyone had to put a self-portrait that they thought really matched with them. It could have been your personal self-portrait that you created, or it could be just one that you found. It was up to you. So what were things that you thought about, or what identities were you thinking about wanting to express when you did this? What were some things you thought about? Did you just think about one thing? Did you have to think about a lot of different things? Family, yes. Kyle says family. See, I find that so interesting because I also was thinking, oh, well, how would I show myself? When I would did this assignment, I thought about, oh, my family. Like, how would I show my family with me? Right? Me too. Not everybody does that though. You don't have to. Good. Claire says personality. Yeah, you want something that can kind of visually capture what you act like or what you feel like or how you kind of are, right? Yeah, exactly. And you might do that with your surroundings, said Claire. Oh, so Tyler said, what art styles? Yeah, so maybe if you are a visual artist or a visual person, you're interested in the style, how, not just what you see, but how it looks. Exactly. Good. Yes, Gus, I loved yours. You said I love my dog. I want to be with my dog. A lot of students always say that I want to be with my dog or I want to be with my cats, right? You want to be with your pet. Again, that's that kind of kinship, right? That kinship identity you have. Good. Alpha says upbringing. Yes, exactly. So that's kind of like your culture, your family, right? A little bit your race or ethnicity as well. Um, exactly. Let's see what else. Yes, good. Fatima talked about the background. Yes, exactly. You want to think about not just, some people want to think about not just the way the person looks, but what is surrounding them, what and how the meanings that are within the surroundings are um showing this meaning to excuse me, giving meaning to the figure, right? Yes, your gender identity or trauma that you have. Absolutely. That might be one. Maybe I should put psychology as psychological. Your psychological identity. So things that have happened in your life and then like things you kind of carry with you from that, right? So your psychological being, well-being, and your gender, how you express your gender and how you identify with your gender. Exactly. And also, yeah, hobbies. Absolutely. Hobbies and talents. Exactly. And then, yeah, some people don't necessarily have like a major cultural heritage that they identify with, which is totally fine. You don't have to. Um, you probably actually do have some things that are related to cultural heritage. You just don't think of them that way. Um, but yeah, so you might want to pick something like that represents what you like. So Daphne like cats. Again, cats and dogs. I would also want my cats to be in my self-portrait. Good. Yes. And your ethnicity. So something, maybe if you're Asian American or African American, maybe you just identify as Black. Maybe you have something like that. So you want to demonstrate that through different symbols in your, as well as in your self-portrait, as well as what you actually look like. Good. So these are some of the things that Ko Hui-dong was probably thinking of, right? So Ko Hui-dong, he was the painter of this portrait, which you should have read about this week. And we're going to be talking mostly about his early life. He has a quite a long career, actually, but we're just talking about this kind of early life, right? So he was actually born into what's called the Jungin in the late 1880s. And the Jungin were like middle people. They weren't a middle class like what we think of. There was still a huge gap between the Jungin and then like the low class. There wasn't, they were kind of like what we think of as upper middle class today. Um, and so they were like scholar officials, such as translators, right? Like he was. Some of them were court painters. They're kind of a little bit lower on this stratification. Merchants a little bit, or sometimes kind of middle people. And so he actually went to study French, right? So thinking about modern Korea, and they're starting to have relationships with these modern empires like France. So they need French translators. And he actually studied ink painting under the two premier painters at the time. An Jung-sik was the one who painted that hybrid painting we were talking about earlier with the mountain and the buildings. And another painter named Jo Suk-jin. So then in the late 1900s, he was actually sent to Japan as a Chosun official, as a Korean official. But in 1910, he lost his status, right? So 1910, after Korea was signed over as a colony to Japan, all government officials lost their status. So they could no longer be Korean officials anymore. So that's why he started to attend the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, and he decided to study painting. So this is a painting by one of the main teachers at the Tokyo School of Fine Arts, and his name is Kuroda Seki, which you can see here. And this is what often people call Japanese Impressionism. So what stands out to you about this painting, and how would you kind of describe its style here? And if you're someone who has studied French Impressionism, I would love your kind of input in what's kind of going on here, which I know some of us are Europeanists in here. Yes, so immediately, the subject matter is a woman wearing a kimono, right? She's wearing this kimono robe, exactly, which seems more traditional, right? So this kind of subject matter is very quote unquote Japanese subject matter, right? Yeah, exactly, Claire. There's a huge contrast between this very blue background, right? It's a very light blue background, and this very dark figure, right? This figure has this very dark black kimono. Exactly. Um, yeah, so you can kind of relate it to if you think of uh the colors of Monet. Kuroseki, I don't think he knew Monet, but he may have been inspired by some of Monet's works if he knew him. I know he didn't study under Monet. But yeah, so maybe it reminds you of Monet a little bit. Let's see what else. Yeah, everyday life. So this is kind of a picture of everyday life, Fatima says. That's very good. Yeah. Yes, exactly, Mitchell. It's an oil on canvas, number one. So that's new. That's already kind of modern and new, right? Ian, very important here. Ian has brought up very visible brush strokes. The paint is very thick. You can look at this even from afar. We're not even zoomed in on it. You can tell where the artist took the brush and did brush strokes, right? That is very integral to the impressionist style, is wanting to make the brush strokes obvious. Yeah, exactly. Elsa, yes, the pastel colors, right? Oh yes, this is another way you can say it. Loose brush strokes. Like it's very it's not very tight knit, like you're not trying to hide them together, right? Yeah, very good. Yeah, exactly. So kind of, thinking about all this is kind of the style that a lot of people were learning from these artists, Kuroseki. He had gone to France and he had studied there and learned this style. Um, and that brings us to Kokidong's kind of style, particularly. So let's do a description of this here. So what are the basics? We already have the basics down here. Kokidong is the artist. It's a self-portrait with hat. You can say what's it called? Zhengzhangguan, I think is what it's called. Zhengzhangguan. Sorry, the name is already escaping me all of a sudden. Or you can just say hat. Hat is fine. This is a scholar official's hat. It's from 1915, oil on canvas. So yeah, the medium is oil on canvas, right? What else would you say about the medium? What about the genre? Sorry, I should have put that here. Genre. What's the genre? Self-portrait. Yes, that's important here. So portrait, we consider a genre because it's not really limited to just oil paintings. You can do a sculptural self-portrait or sculptural portrait. But yeah, so you can call self-portrait it's kind of like something you learn particularly to do, right? So iconography. So who do you see in the portrait? And kind of what are some things about them that you notice? So yes, it's the artist, right? It's Ko Dong. So how would you describe them now? Like what is he doing? What's he wearing? What's kind of going around him? Good. The background is blank. Very important here. It's a very blank background, right? It's very colorful, but it's blank. Yeah. So good. He has this kind of traditional Korean garb on, right? Korean clothing. He let's see. Hold on. I saw something else. Yes, specifically, he looks like he's in scholarly attire. Yeah, this is like a scholarly outfit, right? And the hat is a scholarly hat. It's kind of like a scholar official's hat when they would be at the court having meetings, right? Yeah, and then good. The facial expression, that's also something you should talk about. Hope here's bringing up. Solemn. He looks very solemn, right? What else might you say about his facial expression? Solemn. Does anyone think anything besides that? Professional. That's a good way to put it. Professional. He does look professional, like he's sitting for this. It almost, it's a self-portrait, but you can kind of see he's really kind of focused on his attention, right? Good. Great. So yeah, I said all of that basically here. I said stoic was kind of his expression, right? So composition, yeah, now we're looking at, he's looking at the viewer, right? Exactly. What else about the composition? Does anyone know what is this view called? This has a slight view in portraiture. There's different kinds of views in portraiture. Do any of our art history majors or minors know this view, or painters? 3/4. Yes. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's ish. I would say ish. So we call it a 3/4 view. That's when like the face is tilted just ever so slightly. And so you get this effect here. What's the effect? You have shading on one side of the face and light on the other side, right? Exactly. Yeah, so you have that contrast in the shading, right? Exactly. What else? Let's see. Yes, Callie. So this is kind of intended to show the artists, their technique of using dark and light. Exactly. Yes, exactly. Let's see. Very good, Ian. There's a single light source. Yeah, this has to do with style. I actually wrote that later in style. But yeah, the single light source. From which side is the light source coming? Which side of the painting is the light source coming? Can I tell? Yeah. Yeah, the right side. The right side. Exactly. Good. Oh, sorry. So, yes. So I also said chest up. So there's different ways you can view yourself, right? So you have your chest up view. You can also do a full body view, right? So that's also part of the composition. And then the style, yeah. So we have Japanese Impressionism. What else? We know it's Impressionism. We said that earlier. And we have the light and dark. What else would you say? What about the color? Looks like silk. Yeah, it kind of looks very silky. So I said here muted. Yes, thank you, Fatima. Muted. Yeah, so heavy brush strokes, I said. Um, and another term you'll see for Japanese Impressionism is the name of that artist, Kuroda Purple. This is very Kuroda Purple with the blues and the muted colors. You don't need to know this. You just need to know Japanese Impressionism. You don't need to know Kuroda Purple, but you might see it someday. So there's the light and the dark. Remember this word, chiaroscuro? I had brought that up like 2 weeks ago. I'm never going to test you on it, but it's helpful. And the subdued colors. Yeah, exactly. Kind of dull. So let's think about this. So you read this article about this portrait, right? What did the author Kim Ji-yeon say about why Ko would decide to portray himself in a scholar official's attire? Do you remember what she was saying? There's a couple of different reasons that could be possible. What were some of them? Good. Yes. So Claire, his familial connection to power, right? So he comes from this Jungin family, and he lost his status after annexation. So he wants to show that exactly. So it's personal in that way. And then, yeah, Kyle, very good. This is another one. At school, the teacher may have prompted him to paint himself as Korean because his teacher was very interested in that. Yeah, exactly. There's a third one. Maybe it's not as pronounced in this one, but she does mention it. Some people have said that it's because he was taking a nationalist stance against Japan, that he wanted to show his national identity. Oh, good. Yeah, Cameron brought it up. Thank you. Yeah, so his nationalist stance. So what do you think? Which one of these could it be? What do you think? A mixture. Yeah, a mixture. I think, yeah. I actually tend to think it's a mixture, but I do think it's a little bit more. Personally, I think he was probably thinking about his Jungin status and wanting to showcase himself as a Jungin. But I also think that in this context, it cannot not be a nationalist stance against Japan, right? It's either kind of showing, oh, I am a Chosun, I'm a person of Chosun high status from Chosun. That's who I am. We might be a colony now, but you will never, I will never be Japanese, right? I will always be this Chosun person, right? So I kind of like think of it as a mixture in a lot of ways as well. Exactly. So the reason people are really obsessed with his portrait is because of this. So these were other students at the time. These were their portraits. What do you notice about Ko Hee-dong's portrait? What do you notice? It stands out. Why does it stand out? So it's very bright. Yes, it's very tall. He's not in a Western style outfit. He's not in Western modern clothing. Exactly. He made a choice that was very different from some of his peers, right? He very much wanted to, and yeah, exactly. It's bright. Like it stands out. Like if you look at these against this wall, which one are you probably going to really notice? This bright blue, kind of very muted colors that are very yeah, they're just very different, right? Exactly. And the portrait is overall much bigger than theirs as well. Yeah. Which was what? To fit the hat, he had to do that. Exactly. So then let's just talk about this one really quickly, right? So there was this other portrait that was painted around the same time. We don't know when, but what does Kim Ji-yeon see this, the author see this as kind of representative of in terms of Ko's identity? Do you remember what she said? Yes, Claire, his personal, see himself in a personal setting. Yes, this is very much more intimate kind of portrait, right? Exactly. So she says it's very personal. Yes, Hope. She brings in masculinity. He's demonstrating a sense of masculinity. Yes, exactly. So she says real self in the article. This is his kind of position as his real self. It's kind of more like quote unquote psychological self, what we were talking about earlier. Who he is as a person, not just his national identity or like his cultural background or class background, but who he is on the inside, right? So he's this modern artist and he's a male, right? And so he's demonstrating that with this portrait. So how does he do that? So a couple of things that have been said. Elsa says the intimate setting. Yes, this intimate setting. He's in this maybe room, you're very close up. And the books Ryan brought up in the background might bring up scholarship. What else about this might demonstrate that? What else do you see? Casual clothing and the short hair. Yes, exactly. So this is actually a Korean like farmer shirt. Um, which people would have worn if it was hot out, even in the city. But this is very weird. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but rare or first time to have this bare chest exposed. Even for a man, this was not something you never showed skin in Korea, even in public or anything like that. So this is definitely demonstrating, oh, excuse me, this is definitely demonstrating this new aspect to his understanding of representing the body and his identity through the use of his exposed skin, right? Exactly. Yeah, the mustache. So some of you have brought this up. Yeah, mustache. I'm not sure. You don't see a lot of mustaches. You see mostly beards and mustaches. But yeah, maybe the mustache is kind of this modern way of grooming, masculine grooming. Yeah. So yeah, I said all this. Oh yeah, the oil painting in the background. Sorry, did someone say that? I think if you said that, I missed it. Notice he kind of recreated another kind of very vaguely another painting, a landscape painting in the background, right? And it's framed. So that's how you kind of know it's this Western style painting, because it's in a frame. Exactly. Oh, the pose, Callie says. What about the pose makes you think it's like kind of more intimate? What do you think? Because of the exposure, what else? Yeah, his leg is up. He's not sitting very formally, right? He's very much just kind of like laying back, lounging. That's a good way to put it, Cade. Yeah, relaxed pose. Exactly. Good. All right, last few minutes here. So similarities. So what are some descriptive similarities between these two portraits here? So the medium, the style, the composition. There's a lot of different things you can say here. Because they have very different expressions of the self, but similar styles, kind of. Yeah, so they're both self-portraits. They are both oil paintings. They both are, yeah, kind of that three-quarter view. You see it a little bit better, I think, in the self-portrait with a fan. Facial expressions, very good, Maddie. Yeah, they're both still that kind of stoic or serious facial expression. Yeah. Yes, they are the same subject. They are both self-portraits, the artist. Let me see if I had another thing. Um, thinking about the impressionism. Yes, Elsa, thank you. The loose brushstrokes and the duller colors. Thank you very much. Yeah, these are all things I put. So this kind of mixing of the dull colors, and the with the subdued blues, the light and shadow, the heavy loose brushstrokes. Yeah, very important here. What about descriptive differences? What do you see? That might be different. Yeah, the war on the right, the self-portrait with fans a little bit warmer overall. And it has a background, very important here. Yeah, what Tyler says. It has a background, exactly. What else did I say? And then of course, their iconography is different, right? You have this very relaxed outfit and this kind of scholarly garb. And then the body is much more the focal point in the self-portrait with fan than it is in the self-portrait with hat. Good. Yeah, so these are all things you could say. Interpretive comparison. So really quickly, what do you think is like the kind of similarities and differences in the meaning behind the two artworks? What do you think? What's kind of consistent across the two artworks? I think there's one thing that's pretty obvious. There's a lot of things you could say. Yes, Ian, thank you. Yeah, he's showing how he views himself. It's his self-expression. Yes, absolutely, his self-expression. I said a couple of different things that you could think of, but yeah, that's kind of the general run, right? What is the big difference though here? The big difference is the yes, the setting, the identity he actually expresses here. Exactly. Very good. So as you can see in his artwork, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go over just slightly. In his artwork, right, he has a lot of these different identities that are happening together. Exactly. So we are, and I am never just one identity, but like Ko Hui Dong, we can be Jungin, Korean, modern, artist, scholar, official, masculine, all at the same time, right? Exactly. So thank you very much. Thank you for staying with me today. Sorry you had to miss the New Year's Eve or the New Year's event. If you have questions, you can stay after and ask me questions about the midterm. Please get your midterm in on time, Friday, 11:59 p.m. And send me questions if you have any. Oh, did they? Yeah, oops. Good. But thank you so much. Have a great evening.